In English, I would think that courage could be translated simply as take heart, show mettle, or in colloquial forms, show some spunk and stand up for yourself. So I think we need to, in many ways, colloquialize this in order to understand the drift of the term, and the colloquialization of the term is far easier in a language like English, which is far more flexible, elastic, concrete, and hybrid than perhaps in the more classical European languages. And in French, of course, courage is more of an exhortation to pump up, to build up, as it were, the confidence to face an uncertainty and a space of the unknown. And of course, in case we missed the point, Chantal has ended courage, courage with 3 exclamation marks. And that's, if that wasn't an excess, I'm afraid I've taken it to heart and gone on to multiply it by 2 and come up with 6 elements of research and thinking that I would like to present around the concept of courage. These thoughts are developed out of my research, my writing and publications, and tested in the experience and in the experiment of the Biennale, both in China and this year in Brazil. For me, the Biennales might, and perhaps for you, might appear to be slightly degraded genres of the art world, but the more you travel in the developing world, the more you begin to see the potential and the power of these events. We need not see them as legitimating grounds, but we might see them as grounds in which the courage to stage new ideas, new contacts, new communication is really such a powerful feeling that, and such a powerful experience that one has to rethink the slightly blasé view we have of the Biennale when we think of it from within the Western system, as it were. The 6 elements that I want to organize I call methodological reflections, but they are centered around the term used by Ezra Pound for his methodological reflections, and he called them, in his very mischievous and sometimes deeply politically offensive and obnoxious way, but it has an abrasive element which we need to retain when we think of methodologies and approaches. He called these instigations. And instigation, as you see, echoes both investigation and inspiration. But it's not just a soft, sentimental inspiration. There is some abrasive urging that he sets up in the word instigation. And it is here at the intersection and the interaction between contemporary art and curatorial art practices and activities that I want to ask the first of the instigation questions, as it were. Do we have the courage to think independently? What is independent thinking? How does that square with IKT, which I read simply as the Independent Curators Association? This is my loose translation from the German origin. So what is independent thinking? Yesterday's session, where we heard all the representatives talk about their various projects and set up the kind of swap and exchange of ideas and projects with each other, it was a little bit like a speed dating session. And in this speed dating session, one found that a contrast begins to emerge between what we might call the freelance input and the input from those who are far more anchored and based in some sort of institutional support structure. And I don't want to go into any detail in unpacking this because I'm totally unsure of what the data and the factual situation might be with regard to IKT. But on the one hand, with the freelancers, we have a situation of great uncertainty and a precarious kind of activity. At the opposite end, with those deeply entrenched and anchored in the institutional life of curating, we have the great dreadful scenario of the logic of production and delivery non-stop, as though one is put upon an assembly line of production. And these are blurred and mixed up today. And they are blurred and mixed up because we do need the institutions as support and for the very act of curating, they are often important backups. And does the notion of the freelancer retain an echo, however fading and however faint, an echo of the idea of independent thinking? The idea of independent thinking I wanted to take, and I became more alert to, outside the traditions of Western thinking, outside the traditions of thinking within, as it were, the concept of the concepts and the production of Western Europe. And that is to think of what it might mean in the post-colonial world of China, which was so much in, as it were, in anxiety about its post-communist present, and the fact that it had hardly tackled the issues of being in some way, however quasi and however semi-colonized it might have been, but had not tackled the questions which are so systematically aired in the Indian context. I found ultimately, for the purposes of today, that I should start really with the concept of the anti-political, that the great feeling that we are in the world of art and that we curate in order to have political effects is one of the truths, as it were, truisms that we have to question deeply. The stance of the anti-political, which I have taken from Eastern Europe, from Central Eastern Europe, from the work of Georgi Konrad, whose work I was turned to look at after the former West conference in order to ask ourselves of what do we mean by the expanded Acropolis? Where does Europe begin and where does it end? And to what extent can we pontificate about the borders of Europe if we haven't in fact grasped the long histories and meditations and resistances and the scenarios of dissidence that we found in Central and Eastern Europe as they emerge from their communist past, to ask us the question, with what courage should I speak of the borders of Europe today? What courage does it need to define what is Europe today? In immediate curatorial terms, you can see how this must face an organization like Manifesta, the Biennale of Europe. Which Europe? Western Europe, the new Europe, the expanded Europe, the Europe to come, which ends in Vladivostok, but will eventually just simply link up with Japan, and we will have a sort of wraparound Europe. Is it a Europe that can be contained, or is it a non-containable Europe? For Georgi Konrad, independent thinking meant not in the service of the bourgeoisie, not in the service of the bureaucracy, not in the service of the proletariat, but in the service of mind, of thinking itself. Can the logic of thinking itself be so affirmed? Can we have the courage to speak of affirming the logic of the mind without being immediately accused of formalism, solipsism, and self-enclosure? But I was deeply heartened to find that in Konrad's writings, he should turn to Marcel Duchamp as the figure who stands for an art and for a mode of thinking that we can call independent. And Duchamp's famous, I suppose, phrase or comment was to put art back into the service of the mind. So though we have the word service appearing again, this state of mind, the cultivation of thought, as a crucial dimension that has to be guarded against the world of politics, which degrades and debases itself today as the world of politicking.